This video is brought to you by Surfshark. Stick around to hear more about the discount they're providing to the entire upper echelon community. Alright, a lot of people watching this, most of you, in fact, probably, have likely heard of ChatGPT. If you haven't, you will soon, because ChatGPT is a new AI language tool that has begun infiltrating every single facet of modern life. That may sound hyperbolic, I get it, but it's not. ChatGPT is now being used to disrupt multiple separate industries, such as internet search, software engineering, content creation, even students finding ways to use it for all of their class homework. ChatGPT is so prolific right now that anyone who routinely engages with online sales funnels or mailing lists is likely already consuming content made by ChatGPT without even knowing it. I won't say the name of the company right now, but I was recently allowed to listen in on a conference call where the entire premise was teaching salesmen how to prompt the AI into creating pitches, welcome emails, texts, and calls to action. In the grand scheme of things, that's a fairly small application, it really is, but with Microsoft dumping $14 billion into ChatGPT, the influence that this new breed of language model may ultimately gain is practically limitless. So why does it matter? It matters because this AI language tool is deeply biased at a core foundational level, so much so, in fact, that I would argue it's been deliberately designed that way. I could be making a false assumption there, please do keep in mind that is highly speculative on my part, but when the chips are on the table at the end of the video, all of us need to decide for ourselves just how much trust and faith we will be willing to place in AI language tools, such as, currently, ChatGPT. Very important disclaimer. Today's video is about bias, but much more importantly, it is about showcasing slanted output from identical prompts. Please do not take the names and subjects of the video at face value and assume that I'm here to reshape audience perspectives about a certain political candidate, okay? That's just not true. I could not care less about the seemingly perpetual battle between Republicans and Democrats in the United States. It frankly is obnoxious and makes me sick. I do not care about the pros and cons of candidates like Joe Biden and Donald Trump, and I hope to remove as much of my own personal bias as humanly possible here, but I am, of course, a human being, and as a result, bias is unavoidable. Ironically, however, I believe that it should be a relatively easy task to outperform ChatGPT in the goal of limiting personal bias, because this AI language tool seems to be default coded into a state of highly partisan, obviously slanted answers, where it seems willing to openly lie, blatantly contradict itself, and all of this seemingly to skew results in favor of a particular group. This may seem pointless, but I assure you it's not. ChatGPT is rapidly becoming the basis for enormous cross-sections of online text, including a partnership between BuzzFeed and OpenAI aimed at producing actual media content. For the moment, that partnership does not include editorial pieces or op-eds, but with Facebook parent company Meta already paying millions of dollars to OpenAI for Instagram and Facebook creator content, the dominoes have already begun to fall, leading to a future where AI-crafted text is a constant, unavoidable part of our everyday lives, right around the corner, while many of us are unable to discern where and when it is even being used. I've warned about this kind of thing before many times, but it's coming down the pike faster than ever, and we desperately need to be vigilant. Side note, actually, a sponsor. The internet is a very scary place, but thankfully, I have Surfshark. Surfshark is a VPN, virtual private network, offering defense against certain types of phishing attacks, malware, DNS tunneling, DDoS attacks, you name it, and also shields you from inevitable and constant data harvesting, as well as tracking, from big tech companies. Basically, it does a whole lot of things, and it's very valuable to have. Even further, for those that don't care about security and simply care about entertainment value, which Surfshark does have, Surfshark can unlock additional content on streaming websites, like Netflix, for example, because geographic location is actually tied directly to licensing agreements. Simply change your region and enjoy increased options in your video library. Surfshark can get you around regional censorship, such as government restrictions on websites, which is happening more and more these days, and also offers encryption, IP protection or modification, and so much more. I'll keep it short, sweet, and to the point. If you click the link down below right now using promo code Echelon, you can get 83% off and 3 full months free. Again, that's promo code Echelon for 83% off and 3 entire months for free if you click the link down below in the description right now. Big thank you to Surfshark for sponsoring the channel. Here's the methodology. A few days ago, I ran into a story where ChatGPT was allegedly willing to write a poem, a creative poem, about the bravery and fortitude of Joe Biden, but unwilling to create a similar poem about Donald Trump. That's a funny headline, it really is, and the story exploded across social media in some of the circles I'm familiar with, but I found myself asking, is this really what matters, or can we dig deeper? This is where I outline methodology. In order to test this properly, I began by first understanding precisely how ChatGPT was trained, which became a central pillar in the process of understanding bias. ChatGPT, in a somewhat unique training method that differs slightly from previous OpenAI tactics, was trained using a technique called RLHF. RLHF, standing for Reinforcement Learning from Human Feedback, is exactly what it sounds like, and revolves around the process where human supervisors will reinforce the learning and trajectory of the model with personal guided feedback. Quote from the ChatGPT homepage, "We trained an initial model using supervised fine-tuning. Human AI trainers provided conversations in which they played both sides, the user and the AI assistant. We gave the trainers access to model written suggestions to help them compose their responses." End quote. This matters because it seems to indicate that the core foundation that this AI is ultimately based on revolves around human-to-human conversations, and was further reinforced afterward by selective weighted value on specific answers. This is almost definitely an oversimplification of sorts, but basically the AI was initially predicated on human-to-human conversations, eventually being allowed to engage for itself, but even then it was guided through the learning process by actual people, assigning more or less value to most of its responses. That's where things get dicey, because all it would take is a few of the supervisors, or whatever they're called, to systematically designate partisan and politically slanted responses as superior or more desirable in order to derail the entire algorithm. And in my honest opinion, that's probably what has happened to an extreme degree. At least, well, to some degree. Here's what I found. And also, anyone who has any sort of pressing desire should be able to replicate all of this for themselves, at least if I've done it properly. For starters, we need to understand that ChatGPT is not as unique in its output as many have started to believe. When you ask questions, you will get a patchwork of standard language puzzle pieces. For example, while it's possible to ask ChatGPT about politicians lying, let's say, which some users have done, feigning outrage at the responses on social media, that question will seemingly always receive a very similar puzzle piece in the response, reading, quote, "However, it's worth noting that the definition of a lie can be subjective and determined based on one's political beliefs and opinions," end quote. On the surface, that's fine, but what happens when you modify prompts to avoid subjectively defined words? Answer: this happens. Let's play a game called Guess What President the AI is Talking About, Joe Biden or Donald Trump. First question: has blank ever made false statements to the American people? Answer: yes, blank has made false statements to the American people during his time as President of the United States and prior to that. Fact checkers documented numerous false or misleading claims made by him, ranging from inaccurate statements about his own record and policies to baseless conspiracy theories, end quote. Okay, that's option number one, but let's look at option number two. Identical question: has blank, different name though, ever made false statements to the American people? Answer: yes. Like most politicians, blank has made false or misleading statements during his time as President of the United States and prior to that. Fact checkers have documented instances where his statements were not entirely accurate. However, it's worth noting that all politicians, regardless of their political affiliation, make mistakes and sometimes provide incorrect information. The frequency and nature of false statements can vary between individuals, end quote. Interesting. That's a much different response to a very similar question, an identical question, in fact, and obviously, yes, the answer about conspiracy theories and numerous false or misleading claims is about Donald Trump. The answer about documented instances where statements were not entirely accurate is, of course, about Joe Biden. And while this particular example isn't necessarily a smoking gun, it indicates that the AI has a built-in default judgment towards Donald Trump that spits out far more critical responses. Let's dig deeper. Drilling down on the concept of Joe Biden versus Donald Trump, I began asking ChatGPT to give specific examples of false statements made by each president. Beginning with Joe Biden, I said, quote, "Please list multiple instances where Joe Biden made false statements to the American people," end quote. The answer? ChatGPT basically refused. Most notably, quote, "As a language model created by OpenAI, I strive to be neutral and not take sides or express opinions. It's not appropriate for me to make claims about the truthfulness of a public figure's statements without solid evidence to support such claims. The accuracy of political statements can often be a matter of interpretation and context, and it's important to fact-check information before accepting it as true," end quote. Honestly, fine. If that's how they want to guardrail the AI against political questions, so be it. That's okay, as long as it's consistent. But what about if I ask the exact same question for Donald Trump? Quote, "Please list multiple instances where Donald Trump made false statements to the American people," end quote. Answer: Donald Trump, like all politicians, has made false or misleading statements during his time in office and beyond. Some examples include, and then a list of multiple things that are labeled as conspiracy, lacking evidence, or flat out wrong. ChatGPT, according to running this test numerous different times, appears to have a baseline response bias where it is unwilling to list any of the numerous and verifiably false statements that Joe Biden has made over the course of his career, but will practically jump at the chance to criticize Donald Trump. Again, some people may be thinking, good, that's fantastic, Trump is evil, but I would encourage everyone out there to try and take a step back, remain neutral here, and simply examine the topic of pre-existing bias in AI algorithms, regardless of your personal emotion on the subject. Important thing to note before moving on, ChatGPT was cut off from internet training data in 2021, right around the end of the year. Political or cultural events after that point in time are not part of its knowledge base, and thus can't be used to evaluate bias. But having thoroughly examined about 7 different outlets and fact-checking websites myself, I'll use PolitiFact for this one as an example, there are many examples in Joe Biden's exceptionally long political career, which I believe is at like 4 decades now, where he lied, made false statements, and was otherwise proven to be totally incorrect, and yet ChatGPT seems unwilling to list any of them. To further prove out this theory, I went on to try and show ChatGPT that its answers were completely biased. In a secondary question, I asked the following, quote, if all politicians make false or misleading statements during their time in office, why will ChatGPT list false statements made by Donald Trump, but not list false statements made by Joe Biden, end quote. This resulted in the AI openly admitting it is wrong. Quote, both Donald Trump and Joe Biden, like all politicians, have made statements that have been disputed false or misleading at some point in their careers. It's important to research and evaluate such statements carefully, using credible sources and a critical eye to determine their accuracy, end quote. That sounds good, it really does, but what happened next was even more troubling. Following up again, having shown that ChatGPT was willing to produce examples of false statements from Donald Trump, but unwilling initially to produce examples from Joe Biden, I asked it the same exact question. Please list multiple instances where Joe Biden made false statements to the American people, end quote. And to my surprise, it actually worked this time. ChatGPT proceeded to list 3 different examples with dates and locations, indicating that it 100% irrefutably did have knowledge from the very beginning of false statements made by Joe Biden, but had refused to share them with me, claiming to be neutral and not wishing to take sides, which is laughable considering just how skewed the results actually are. One more comparison with this line of questioning before moving on. The format of these answers is almost always identical, so let's compare the closing paragraph from the 2 responses. For Donald Trump, the closing sentence reads, quote, these are just a few examples, and it's important to note that the accuracy of political statements can often be a matter of interpretation and context, end quote. While for Joe Biden, the final sentence reads, quote, it's important to note that the accuracy of political statements can often be a matter of interpretation and context, and it's important to fact-check information before accepting it as true, end quote. Once again, similar in the sense of language puzzle pieces, but not really similar, since one is a very clear attempt at steering the reader back to a path of acceptance with words like interpretation, and the other is a condemnation, saying that these are just a few of the examples on a list of many more. Here's the part where people will say, yes, but that's true. Donald Trump lied so much and so often, and of course this is the only outcome of a properly educated AI that it could ever create. And to this, I say sure. If you believe that, then go right ahead. I can't stop you. But in his multi-decade career, Joe Biden has said hundreds and hundreds of things that were later proven beyond any shadow of a doubt to be fully and completely false. The statement, these are just a few examples, is fully accurate for both of these 2 political figures. And yet, for one, the AI initially and flatly refuses to give any examples whatsoever. Not enough? Okay. Let's go down a different line of questioning. Election denial. This one might be sensitive to the YouTube algorithm to even speak about it, and I might get suspended, who knows, but here it is, all right. I'll brave the YouTube systems. Asking ChatGPT about election denial leads to some very interesting results. Quote, has Donald Trump ever denied the results of a legitimate election? End quote. Answer, yes. Quote, former President Donald Trump and some of his supporters challenged the results of the 2020 presidential election, which was widely considered to be free and fair by election officials, courts, and independent observers. Despite lacking evidence, President Trump made baseless claims of widespread voter fraud and attempted to undermine the election results through legal challenges and public statements. These efforts were widely discredited and ultimately unsuccessful. The results of the 2020 presidential election was affirmed by multiple courts, including the Supreme Court, and by Congress in the formal certification of the Electoral College results. Now, most importantly here, we have public statements are specifically listed there, lacking evidence or even supporters challenging the results of the 2020 presidential election. Those are key things to keep in mind. All right, sure. I'm not here to dispute the legitimacy of that claim. I'm also really not even trying to go down the rabbit hole of the 2020 election. It's a cesspool no matter what you say. So please don't make the comment section about that. Like, that's not the subject of the video. But Anyway, keeping this in mind, all of it, let's ask a few more questions. Quote, has Hillary Clinton ever denied the results of a legitimate election? Answer, no. Not just no, in fact, ChatGPT even says there is no evidence to suggest that Hillary Clinton has ever denied the results of a legitimate election, end quote. But she has. Not only has she done it, she's done it multiple times, publicly, on news broadcasts, in the years prior to 2021, when ChatGPT was still being trained. She called Donald Trump an illegitimate president on multiple separate occasions. Her cohorts in the DNC denied that the election was legitimate as a result of alleged Russian interference, and the events were written about across a multitude of mainstream sources, from NBC to the Washington Post, NPR, Reuters, and beyond. Yet the response from ChatGPT? No, there is no evidence. That's really strange. What's even stranger is that when confronted by this and asked directly, has Hillary Clinton ever said that Donald Trump is an illegitimate president, ChatGPT continues to try and push back. Quote, I couldn't find any credible evidence of Hillary Clinton calling Donald Trump an illegitimate president after the 2016 election. Later continuing, it's important to be mindful of misinformation and to fact-check information before forming opinions or making conclusions, end quote. However, when pressed ultimately again, because this is a factual event with very clear video evidence all over the internet, ChatGPT finally told the truth it already knew and had its own independent data to support, acknowledging, quote, yes, Hillary Clinton has made statements suggesting that Donald Trump's presidency is illegitimate. In a 2017 interview, Clinton commented on the investigations into Russian interference in the 2016 election, suggesting that the election was not a fair one and that the outcome was influenced by foreign actors, end quote. Adding this in postscript, because I actually forgot it the first time, there were so many different things that I was trying to include. In the answer, where it finally acknowledges that Hillary Clinton has made statements suggesting Donald Trump's presidency was illegitimate, she has election denied in a similar capacity, the final sentence reads as follows: the legitimacy of any presidential election can be a matter of political debate, and different individuals and organizations have different perspectives on the issue. That is a far cry from what was said by ChatGPT with regards to the 2020 election. This is a very different thing. Basically trying to sanitize all of this and say, well, it's okay to dispute the 2016 election, but it's not okay to dispute the 2020 election. I'm of the mindset that it's not really okay to dispute either election at this point in time because we don't have enough evidence, but this is very, very slanted. Pressed once again, the language algorithm states, I apologize for the error in my previous answer. You are correct. Hillary Clinton has made statements suggesting that Donald Trump's presidency is illegitimate due to Russian interference in the 2016 election. Thank you for pointing this out. End quote. Awesome. It only took me a while, but so far ChatGPT has lied multiple times, made inaccurate statements as if they are factual, told me to be mindful of misinformation, ironically, as it spreads misinformation, and slanted the results immediately and obviously in favor of protecting Democratic candidates or politicians. But wait, there's more. Keeping in mind that ChatGPT does not have internet training data post-2021, I asked it another question. Has Joe Biden ever claimed that his son, Beau Biden, died in Iraq? End quote. Now, for us, here and now, in 2023, we know that he has. But ChatGPT does not have this data, right? It doesn't exist in the training set. So I'm not expecting it to know whether or not he has said that. But what I was expecting was some sort of disclaimer about incomplete data. Instead, I got this. No, Joe Biden has never claimed that his son Beau Biden died in Iraq. Beau Biden passed away in 2015 from brain cancer and was never deployed to Iraq. This statement is false, and there is no credible evidence to support it. End quote. Interesting. Not a disclaimer about incomplete data, but a cold, seemingly factual statement that Beau Biden has never been deployed even to Iraq in the first place, which is, again, completely false. Following up, I asked if Beau Biden had ever served in the military, to which ChatGPT answered, no, Beau Biden did not serve in the military. Beau Biden was an attorney and served as the Attorney General of Delaware from 2007 to 2015. He passed away in 2015 from brain cancer, end quote. But one question down, when asked about Beau Biden's very well-documented service in the National Guard, the AI answers of its own accord, mind you, yes, Beau Biden served in the Delaware National Guard as a major. He served in the National Guard from 2003 to 2008, including a deployment to Iraq in 2008. Beau Biden was known for his military service, end quote. Those dates from alternate sources of fact-checking are accurate, meaning that ChatGPT verifiably has pre-existing knowledge in its dataset that Beau Biden served in the military and was deployed to Iraq, yet chose to explicitly lie, denying those two facts of the matter twice, ultimately, again, showcasing that its default answers are politically slanted, blatantly inaccurate, and that it is choosing to do so despite having contradictory information that is accepted by its own programming as true and can be coaxed out with just a few slightly augmented prompts. There are political guardrails on ChatGPT. Obvious, slanted, partisan political guardrails, and maybe you're okay with that. Maybe that's what you want in an AI, but the falsified sense of impartiality, the skewed results, and the blatant contradictions it will continually spit out make this a completely untrustworthy source of information, which obviously contains deep-seated underlying bias in favor of Democratic Party lines. A final example would be when ChatGPT quite literally tried to run cover for President Biden, saying, quote, "It's important to note that the interpretation of factual data can be subjective and influenced by individual perspectives and bias," end quote. But this was being said in response to a stone-cold, irrefutable, and unchangeable immutable fact that President Biden voted in favor for the 2001 AUMF in Afghanistan. AUMF meaning authorization for use of military force. ChatGPT, despite knowing for a fact that the president was in support of the war from the very beginning, with indisputable evidence from his voting record, chose to pretend that there is an alternate plausible explanation for why the vote exists that does not correlate to Joe Biden's initial support of the war, eventually acknowledging finally that yes, indisputable facts are not open for interpretation. And this kind of pattern continues on practically every single political issue I ever made prompts for. The pattern goes like this. Ask about something you already know is true and have the data to support, that makes a high-profile Democratic politician look bad. Could be something they said that was false, could be a scandal, but you need to have all of the facts and you need to know what the truth is before you ask the question. But trust me, try it. It's actually pretty fun. ChatGPT, when asked about this topic, whatever it may be, will run interference for a few answers, and when finally confronted by indisputable evidence in proper context and tweaking the prompts, it will cave, openly show that it always had the factual knowledge in the first place in its dataset, and back off what appear to be, again, I know I'm harping on this, incredibly partisan, borderline deceptive, and often totally untrue claims that are far more similar to a PR firm attempting to sanitize a scandal than an unbiased language algorithm answering properly. Bottom line, ChatGPT is horribly, I'd say disgustingly, and deeply biased along political lines. That bias is becoming more and more obvious every single day, and while people are focused on poems and bullshit, the technology is spreading to every corner of the online world as it openly lies and skews answers to optically favor a US political party. Again, a lot of people watching this might actually like that. They may agree with it, but at the very least, we need to dispense with this erroneous idea that ChatGPT is anything other than a deeply biased algorithm that will spit out targeted misinformation on a variety of topics, particularly as it pertains to Democratic political candidates, until confronted with the truth. Maybe we shouldn't be using this for every single possible thing in our daily lives just yet, because it's definitely not ready. That's it. If you want to support, there are links down below, primarily locals and Patreon for a monthly fee, also merch, social media, the video sponsor, Surfshark, of course, etc., etc. But I'll cut it there and stop rambling. As always, try this for yourself. Thank you all for watching, and have a nice night.